Hello and welcome back to the NWR Virtual Healthcare Conference. My name's Matt Wright. Next up, we have Avecho Biotechnology, listed on the ASX under the ticker AVE. Joining us is the CEO, Dr. Paul Gavin. Before we get started, another reminder that if you want to ask a question, please feel free to type it in using the Q&A panel within the Zoom app. I'll now pass it over to Paul. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for your time this afternoon. My name is Dr. Paul Gavin, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Avecho Biotechnology. So Avecho is a Melbourne-based company with a novel formulation technology called TPM. Now, our background is pharmaceutical drug development for traditional non-cannabis medicines, but the expertise that we've developed over the last 20 years is directly applicable to a range of shortcomings that affect the broader cannabis industries. Now, today, I'm going to talk to you about our pharmaceutical TPM-enhanced cannabidiol capsule that we've developed over the last couple of years and is heading towards a pivotal phase 3 clinical trial in Australia, and also how we're positioning ourselves to exploit the lucrative global cannabis markets using this and other TPM-enhanced cannabinoid products. There's our safe harbor statement. So look, before I get into the product itself, I wanted to highlight why cannabinoids are such a good fit for Avecho. And so many countries around the world, I think it's about 30 at the moment, have enacted legislation permitting the use of cannabis extracts for medicinal purposes. And others have also allowed consumer and recreational markets to grow as well. But because it's been illegal for so long, the normal R&D into formulation development and clinical trials has really been minimal. And the initial product offerings have been simple oil-based formulations or flour. Now, moving forward, a range of more acceptable pharmaceutical dosage forms are going to be required by the regulators, by patients, physicians, and consumers. Now, despite being relatively new, the legal market is already huge. It's already bigger than most drug markets. It's quite insane. I mean, the global legal cannabis market is valued currently at about 17.8 billion, not currently actually, 2021, USD. It's projected to reach about 73.6 billion USD in 2027. So that's both the medicinal and recreational uses, I guess. And despite the huge value of this market already, the products are already commodities. It's been a race to the bottom on price. There's very little differentiation between anything. Everyone's just fighting a brand slash, price war. Now, on the pharmaceutical side, there's only one FDA-approved CBD product anywhere in the world. It's a product called Epidiolex. It was developed by GW Pharma. It's approved by a range of regulatory agencies for rare childhood epilepsy conditions. So it's an orphan drug that's not often prescribed. Despite this, GW Pharma was acquired for $7.2 billion US in 2021 by Jazz Pharma, specifically to obtain Epidiolex. So there is real interest from big pharma and high potential value in pharmaceutically registered cannabinoid products. However, the cannabinoids themselves suffer from a range of technical issues that make formulation work quite difficult. So they're all oil-soluble molecules with poor oral bioavailability. So depending on the literature you read, of the cannabis that you eat or cannabinoids that you eat, only 3 to 8% is ever absorbed to give any kind of therapeutic value. The rest is metabolized and excreted. And this presents real challenges for developing cannabinoid formulations that deliver the drug effectively. Now, if you can increase the absorption, you can have a product with greater therapeutic effect. You can target new indications that have been untreatable because of the high doses required. You can reduce the cost to patients because they need less drug. And from our side, you can provide commercial differentiation. Now, most cannabis companies really don't have the background or the internal expertise to develop medicines in general, and they're really poorly equipped to develop pharmaceutical cannabinoids that are intended for future registration. So that's really where we come in. So we have a drug development technology called TPM. We've been using it for 20 years on non-cannabis medicines, as I mentioned. Now, when added to systems that contain water, our TPM will assemble into tiny little nanoparticles that encapsulate drug molecules. And this encapsulation can increase drug solubility and stability, especially for drugs that are poorly soluble in water, like cannabinoids. And that's essentially what you're looking at in the picture here. So the vial on the right is cannabidiol, CBD, in a liquid that's mostly water. You can see it's not soluble, it's just living as a solid aggregate. The vial on the left is exactly the same vehicle with a little bit of TPM. So the TPM has formed these nanoparticles. If it's encapsulated, the cannabidiol, and you have an evenly dispersed formulation. Now, when we see that kind of profile, irrespective of what drug it is, it means we're pretty comfortable from our experience that we can build products that have increased oral absorption and also increased topical absorption as well for topical and transdermal products. Now, this little experiment with CBD, we did it in collaboration with a US company called PHARMACEUTICAL. And upon seeing that result, we just determined that we really should be using our technology and our expertise to develop cannabinoid products for pharmaceutical registration, because at the time, no one was really doing it. And so we began by optimizing oral formulations for CBD absorption. So this process has really gone across 4 countries. We started with Australia, then we went to Denmark, then we went to the US, then we went to the UK. And we've ended up with a product that performs really well. So the graph on the left was the first bioavailability study we did in Denmark. The tiny little red bar there is the absorption in rats of a single dose of CBD dissolved in an oil called MCT. This is essentially what patients all around the world are prescribed, CBD in MCT. You can see that the absorption's pretty awful. Now, the formulations 1, 2, and 3 are different prototype TPM formulations. And the one on the right, labeled TPM3, this one increased CBD absorption in rats by about 40 times. So good increase in absorption. The graph on the right is actually a much more recent study we did last year in dogs. So dogs are a model of choice for cannabinoid absorption now. We did this study at the request of a large sort of pharmaceutical company that specifically wanted to see how our product compared to Epidiolex. So you remember that's the FDA product that was acquired for $7.2 billion. Now, as you can see from this graph, the red line is our formulation. It has much better CBD absorption than Epidiolex. In this experiment, it was about 400%. So we're pretty comfortable that the product that we were developing was really applicable to the pharmaceutical industry. Now, while we were doing this formulation optimization, a funny thing happened at home with our TGA. So just before I describe this Australian opportunity, because it is unique in the world, and none of us would ever ordinarily develop a drug product for Australia to begin with. But the background is that Australia only has a medicinal cannabis industry. We don't have consumer or recreational products allowed. It's all medicinal, and all the products are currently prescribed by the unregistered medicine scheme. So none of these medicines are registered with the TGA. They're all operating via the authorized prescriber or the special access scheme. And products that operate via those schemes aren't obliged to prove that they work. They aren't obliged to prove that they're safe. They aren't obliged to prove that they're manufactured using all the normal pharmaceutical rigor. And so, the feedback that we had early on talking to medicinal cannabis companies when we offered to help was that they were able to sell cannabis products without investing in research. So given that, why would they ever invest in research? So it was really that made us decide we were going to do it ourselves. But the TGA is obviously pretty uncomfortable with that position. And so they dangled a huge carrot in front of all of us, which was essentially that if you registered a pharmaceutical CBD product in Australia, they would allow it to be registered as an over-the-counter medicine. So instead of having to find a GP willing to prescribe cannabis or cannabinoids and getting a prescription and all the cost and time associated with that, you could walk into any pharmacy in the country and buy the product direct from the chemist. And so you have a direct access to 26 million patients. Now, the caveats to that are that it's only for oral, sublingual, or transmucal dosage forms, which we were already working on. It's only for products proven to work in phase 3 clinical trials and registered with the TGA, which we were doing anyway. And it's only for maximal daily doses of 150 milligrams and indications that are appropriate for an over-the-counter medicine. So ones that aren't too serious, that they need medical supervision, and for conditions that you can diagnose yourself. So acute pain, insomnia, anxiety, these kind of things. Now, the 150 milligram upper limit for a daily dose is still considered to be pretty low for CBD. And the jury was out whether this would be efficacious. But if you can increase the absorption, and your 150 mg dose is equivalent to a normal 300 or 450, suddenly you are in a really strong position. And to be honest, And the TGA came down with this guidance. It was like it was written specifically for us. It plays to all our strengths and all the things that we have been developing over the last kind of 20 years. So it's a really unique commercial opportunity that we felt we had to take advantage of, because any CBD products registered with the TGA for this will command a unique commercial opportunity in Australia. And so, look, this is the product that we've been building over the last 3 years. So as I said, we've optimized the formulation for increased absorption. We've demonstrated that in 2 different animal models. We finalized, we took those prototype formulations and engaged Catalent in the US, who turned it into a pharmaceutical soft gel capsule. We finished that at the end of 2021. Each capsule contains 75 milligrams of CBD. Why is it 75 milligrams? Because of this upper daily dose of 150. So we can give 2 capsules at once for sleep before bed, or we could give 2 capsules at the start and end of the day for indications like pain, and still fall within this over-the-counter criteria. It contains ultra pure synthetic CBD, because we know the regulatory agencies and the pharmaceutical industry understand synthetic medicines. And this is, from a CMC perspective, this is obviously the preference. It's got good ongoing stability. So we're about 18 months in, 2 years is coming up soon on the first batch. We've completed phase 1 PK study looking at a dose response. And so that part of a submission pack is done. And we had ethics approval at the end of December last year for our pivotal phase 3 clinical trial, which I'll talk about in a sec. As mentioned, we'll start with this Australian TGA OTC opportunity, but we all have to acknowledge that even with this opportunity, the rest of the world is the jewel in the crown. But if we can prove it works in insomnia for Australia, we'll have no trouble getting interest in the overseas markets. And lastly, full patent protection. So, platform technology, we already had sort of 14 patent families protecting products containing TPM. We filed 2 years ago, 2 additional patents on this specific formulation. They're in the last phases of PCT, and we have to pick our countries, I think, next month to go into grant around the world. And so while I guess the over-the-counter opportunity in Australia, is good, we needed to pick an appropriate indication. So we're starting with insomnia. As I say, there's a relative absence of good randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials using CBD anywhere in the world for most indications, but there is a growing body of prescribing data suggesting that CBD will be pretty good for alleviating the symptoms of insomnia. Now, I probably don't have to describe what insomnia is. I'm sure most of you are our candid target patients. It's broadly defined as difficulty initiating or maintaining sleep. The stats on the right-hand side are from a Deloitte survey in Australia a couple of years ago. So 40% of us are getting less sleep than we need. Nearly 60% of us are experiencing these symptoms 3 to 4 times a week. Only 20% are reporting that our sleep is uninterrupted. We're spending $250 million per year on existing medications that have unwanted side effects, and it costs the Australian economy about $19.1 billion. Now, we went to the TGA. TGA confirmed that insomnia would be an indication appropriate for sleep. However, while that's all exciting, really there is a dash of cold reality, and that is that the design and conduct of pharmaceutical insomnia studies is very difficult. And you need a fair degree of clinical experience to get it right. So as I said, there's an absence of randomized placebo-controlled studies using CBD that you can use to help design your study. And the main concern really is the confounding effect of the placebo effect. Now, insomnia in the phase 3 trials is predominantly measured by subjective endpoints. So we're essentially asking patients how they feel that they slept. And that's obviously a leading question that's very susceptible to the placebo response. So patients will invariably tell you that they slept much better, even when they've only received placebo. So look, this is a problem that we've been designing around for the last year. Our trial really took a year to design, and we've been building around this for most of that time. Fortuitously, I happened to mention it to a journalist about October last year, which is this sort of screen capture here, and was interviewed for an article where I specifically sort of was a bit of a doomsayer and sort of said that, placebo effect is going to make a lot of these studies fail. Now, in the last 2 months, we've seen results announced by the first 2 medicinal cannabis companies for the completion of their phase 3 clinical trials using CBD for sleep. And both trials failed. and both trials claimed that they couldn't see the drug's activity because of the high placebo effect. So I was very happy that I had run around in the background last year and told all the shareholders, it will fail in a bunch of studies because of the placebo effect, but don't lose faith in the molecule itself because we are designing around this. And so, yeah, our trial has a bunch of differences that make it much more likely to succeed, and specifically higher dose. So for whatever reason, we can go up to 150 milligrams with this opportunity, but a bunch of the medicinal cannabis companies have only chosen to go to 100. So we'll be doing the full 150 milligram dose, and this is prior to even accounting for any increases in absorption. We have significantly higher patient numbers. So we all know that if you are unsure or you've got a minimal effect size that you're looking to examine, you need statistical power through patient numbers. And so a bunch of these studies have been done with 200 to 300 patients, or a bit over 300. We'll be dosing 540 in our study to make sure we've got sufficient patients to see the effect size. We also have much higher inclusion scores for insomnia and much tighter inclusion criteria. So we have a much bigger range to see a change than some of the other guys in the space. And we are making sure our patients are as homogenous as possible. Look, essentially, garbage in, garbage out. If you take in patients that have really loose inclusion criteria and their indications are all over the place, then you can't expect to get statistically valuable measurements at the end. So this point will really drive the cost and the numbers on our study, because we will be kicking off a lot of patients that don't appear good enough. Now, with that in mind, the data analysis will also do an interim analysis. So we'll be dosing 540 patients, but after 300, we'll do an interim analysis. We'll do a futility assessment, and we'll do a repowering calculation to determine how many patients we need to finish the study with a successful p-value. And I won't talk too much about them here, but we have built mechanisms throughout the study to reduce the severity of the placebo effect. So this is really a huge opportunity for us, because everything about this study and this development plays to our strengths. And a lot of the other guys from the medicinal cannabis space that don't have the clinical background that we have are starting to fall over. So it is quite possible that we are the kind of last man standing in this field. And so really quick snapshot of our study. The trial was designed using the FDA and the EMEA guidance documents for insomnia. There was the risk that a couple of others seem to have fallen for, that with the Australian opportunity, you water the trial down to meet maybe an OTC kind of medicine standard, but you end up with something that's inadmissible to the FDA and or the Europeans. Now, we need it to be admissible over there, because if you make it admissible over there, you're more likely to get big pharma approaching you. Now, we also took out the recently approved FDA insomnia drugs, Dayvigo and Quviviq. We took out all the important design aspects from those studies, and we've built something that uses all the acceptable FDA and European measurement standards for insomnia. So insomnia severity index, sleep efficiency, sleep onset latency, and a whole lot of secondaries. So in essence, we are very comfortable that if CBD does anything for sleep, this trial will capture it, and this trial will capture it in a manner that is usable for a subsequent regulatory submission. And so what does the remaining development look like? It's really the three main pillars of the development that are remaining. So finishing off the CMC, we've already tech transferred the product to 3 separate manufacturers now. We're going through some scale up. We'll put the registration batches down in the next couple of months to be used on the formal stability, and then we'll complete the CMC part of the dossier. While that's happening, we jump into the phase 3 clinical trial. So as I said, it took a year to design. It's pretty much ready to go, and we'll have clinical supply ready for dosing in the coming months. And while that's all happening, we'll be working on the regulatory submission to allow a TGA submission in the new year. And just quickly, I spoke about the start maximizing value from the work done on the product, and there's a couple of ways that this is unfolding. So while we focus on the remaining development for a sleep-related indication, we have the ability to license the CBD capsule for different indications. So CBD is currently being prescribed for a huge range of different things around the world. So it's entirely appropriate for us to invest in sleep and license it to someone else for pain, and someone else for anxiety, and someone else for epilepsy, and let those guys pay for those clinical programs. At the same time, we can license it by different geography. So it's not a global market yet. A lot of the countries are their own little islands with respect to cannabinoids. So we can license it separately into individual countries. And we can also license it by different markets. So we're investing heavily in the most expensive, which is the pharmaceutical industry. But exactly the same product can then be exploited into the unregistered medicinal cannabis space and the UK consumer space and the North American, recreational space. And there are all these different markets that the same product can go into. And so this strategy allows us to multiply the applications and licenses for a single CBD product. So whereas we're used to developing an entire pipeline of different products, now we sort of have a single product that's become its own pipeline. And this licensing strategy is already beginning. So we've licensed the CBD capsule to a US company for arthritis. So this is Medterra Pharma, who are a division of Medterra, who are one of the US's most successful consumer CBD companies. They've now relabeled Medterra Pharma Pearland. They're going to pay for the clinical development of an osteoarthritis program. Now, in the event that it fails on their coin. In the event that it works, suddenly our product is embedded in an indication that we didn't have the bandwidth and the resources to pursue ourselves. And we get all the licensing and milestones and royalty payments for that. Separate or in parallel, we have dipped our toe in the recreational cannabis space in the US. We won't play there ourselves. That's not what we do, but we acknowledge that increased absorption adds value there as well. Now we have a small deal it's taking a while to get some stuff to market with a US cannabis company. But what we have done over the last 3 months specifically is work off that and optimize a series of edible products that contain TPM and THC and significantly increase the rate of absorption, the magnitude of absorption, and the duration of absorption. That's obviously very exciting for the US cannabis market, but for us, that's pharmaceutical, that's neuropathic pain, that's anxiety, that's all these other kind of things that, we can add value to with a new dosage form. So very quickly, we've sort of accumulated a portfolio of differentiated cannabis products. Again, remember, in a world that's essentially commodified. So we have the CBD capsule for sleep. We're talking to someone else about pain. We've already licensed it for arthritis. We're talking to someone else about anxiety, someone else about Prader-Willi. There's lots of opportunities with that. The Lambert Initiative in Sydney are doing 2 separate clinical trials with our CBD soft gel this year. We're going to do, we've got a topical product we haven't even spoken about today. So the one, we have a product commercialized with Novartis, which is essentially Voltaren. We took the drug out of that product and replaced it with CBD. We did a small phase 2 trial last year and it worked really well. We're going to do a much bigger study with topical CBD and osteoarthritis this year, again with the Lambert. And we have these edibles, we have these oils, we have a whole range of products now available for licensing. And all of the things that you're looking at here, we have subsequently taken out the CBD and replaced it with THC and CBG and CBC and CBN and the minor cannabinoids to multiply the number of products that are available for licensing as these things become more and more popular. And just lastly, we do more than cannabinoids. And I guess this is really indicative of the sort of pharmaceutical rigor that I'm trying to advertise that we're applying to the cannabinoids. So 2 recent pharmaceutical deals with our non-cannabinoid products. So just before Christmas, Perrigo in the US licensed our topical ibuprofen gel, which has better absorption than the commercial products on market. They're going to do clinical development for US registration of that particular product. It's not currently available in the US. We also did an agreement with another US pharmaceutical company called Athenex that are taking one of our TPM vitamin K injection products, pharmaceutical injectables, to the FDA in a pre-IND. And depending on the FDA feedback and the amount of work remaining, that will determine what kind of agreement we do with Athenex moving forward. And we're talking to other companies about further non-cannabinoid pharmaceuticals in our portfolio. So just lastly, the quick company snapshot. As of the end of the year, we had $1.5 million in the bank. We're finalizing some additional capital now that will go towards funding the phase 3 clinical trial. We have a very loyal top 20 shareholders that sort of hold about 40% of the company. And every CEO will tell you they're undervalued, but pretty unheard of for a company going into a phase 3 clinical trial to have a market cap of just over 16 million. So obviously in the event we do what no one else on the world has done so far and get successful phase 3 clinical trial results with the CBD study in insomnia, we would expect that to be a significant re-rate. And so the key value drivers for this year, obviously the phase 3 clinical trial program. That's going to form the bulk of the year. The product has increased absorption. It's got GMP validation. It's got good stability. We've done our best to incorporate a number of smart trial design elements to maximize the chance of a successful phase 3. And we're confident that if CBD, as I say, does anything for sleep, we will catch it with this trial design, and it'll be very successful. In addition, we'll do our large topical studies in osteoarthritis. And we've got, which we haven't talked about, 5 additional clinical trials all happening this year. Run by third parties or with third parties for different products and different indications, which will all add to the news flow. And then these new cannabinoid products that we've got in development, which we hope to partner off. So we really do come into this year with a fair bit of interest in our products, and we do aim to capitalize on that momentum to build, significant value in the company that translates to our shareholders. So thank you everyone for your time, and I'll open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Paul. I'll now go to questions, as you've alluded to. The first question that's come through is, when is the phase 3 clinical trial expected to begin dosing?
We're thinking it's all relying on the availability of clinical supply. At this stage, it looks like it'll be mid-year. So whether that's May or June or July, the clinical supply is the one that we're working through now, but it'll definitely be mid-yearish. We're trying to do it as soon as we can, obviously.
Excellent. I forgot to add the reminder that if anyone has a question, please feel free to type it in using the Q&A panel within Zoom. The next question is, can you elaborate on the pathway you'd have in mind for taking the soft gel capsule into the larger international market?
So the US and the European registration pathway require 2 phase 3 clinical trials. So they have 1 phase 3 clinical trial that is subjective endpoints. So that's what we were talking about, essentially validated questionnaires saying, how do you feel? And a second independent phase 3 clinical trial, which uses polysomnography. So that's when you go into the sleep clinic and you have all the electrodes on and you're measured for sleep. Now, the subjective one is the one that's of most important, but they want the objective measure to support the subjective. Now, we have objective measures in our study to de-risk it, but we don't have the polysomnography. So essentially, the pathway into the overseas markets would essentially be, we do this trial and or do the registration, and then realistically, we license it to Big Pharma. Everyone should know that Big Pharma is cannabis curious and watching this like a hawk. They are all interested in getting into pharmaceutical cannabinoids. They just are not yet convinced that cannabinoids will be proven medicines and won't necessarily end up as recreational and consumer products. We're talking to Big Pharma now, as I'm sure a bunch of our colleagues in the space are. In the event that we get a successful phase 3 clinical trial, there is very, very little chance that we won't have a licensee with one of the bigger overseas pharmaceutical companies that want to take it through the rest of the world.
Very good. And another question that I'll add is, I know you were at the CANNABIS event last week. Was there anything that you picked up from there, any sort of new learnings or from the space or the sector?
Yes. So to be honest, I mean, that conference and the industry, I guess, over the last number of years has been really evangelical. So sort of people in the space that have really kind of, really gung-ho, and we should be all prescribing it, and we should just be, it's natural and it's great and we should just be doing it. As I say, we've been kind of one of the darker horses in the space advocating that, if you want to reduce the stigma and get GPs to prescribe it, you got to prove it works and you got to prove it's safe and you got to register it. They had an ex-GW pharma guy visit who gave the opening address and canopy growth, and he laid down exactly what we have been saying. I went up to him afterwards and said, oh my God, yeah, the same thing that we've been saying. It's clinical trials, it's registration. If you want to remove the stigma of medicinal cannabis, you have to do the work to prove it works. And so there was a much stronger emphasis on science and rigor and bioavailability, which we've been doing 3 years. So it very much played to our strengths. Excellent. Well, that's all I've got time for. So, Dr. Paul Gavin, thank you very much for your presentation today, and we'll leave it there. Thank you. Next up, we have Envirix in about 10 minutes' time. So I hope you can join us for that one. But thanks again, Paul. Cheers.